Hello, my name is Simon Oliver and welcome to the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of Nottingham and another in our Why Studies series of videos. Today I'm joined by Tom O'Loughlin, who is the Professor of Historical Theology. Tom, you study the Christian past. Why that subject area? Why study Christian history?
Well, one could study Christian past in many ways, and the most common way is to study texts. But the danger with studying texts is you understand the text and you forget that texts are the product of people. Can I give you an example of studying the Christian past? Look at this. It's a cheap, mass-produced lamp from 4th century North Africa. It was found in a rubbish pit somewhere just outside Carthage. And the reason it was thrown into the rubbish pit was there was a slight crack when it was made, and you can see the crack. And so it was no longer fit for purpose. It started to splutter. It's been used for many years because you can see all the carbon around it. And you can believe me, because you can't see this, you can still smell olive oil 1,500 years later off this. It's a very simple thing. It was made it was mass-produced, and there's the maker's name. It was made deliberately for Christians, but the man who made it was not a Christian, because there is the Chi-Rho, the first two letters of the word Christ.
Greek letters. The
two Greek letters, CH and R, Chi and Rho, spelling Christos. But by the 4th century, this is a symbol. When you see these two letters together, it's the symbol for the word Christ. And how we know it wasn't made by a Christian or wasn't made by someone very learned is the row is back to front. Around the light is a victory sign because Christ is the one who is the victor. This is before Christians start thinking of the suffering Christ. They're thinking of Christ as the one who has conquered death, and there is that great symbol, olive leaves all around it. Now, what did this little lamp mean? Well, when this was used in a Christian household, it was used by people, it was used by a family. This gave them light in the evening time. They would have thought back to the words in the psalm, your word is a lamp for my path and a light for my way. They would have thought back to the story by Jesus, hold your light up on a lampstand. But when this was used, they would have begun by saying, may God give us the light of heaven. They would have had a little lighting ceremony in the house. And every so often they would have gathered together as a community, and they would have said the prayers that stand behind what's now called Vespers or evening prayer, and they would have had a lamp lighting ceremony. And St. Basil the Great, writing at the beginning of the 4th century, says, every time we gather in the evening time, we sing to Christ as the evening star. We sing a song, Phos Hilaron, the light of evening. And writing back then, he says, this prayer is so ancient we don't even know who wrote it. The Greek church still use that prayer. Westerners use a translation of that prayer. So what we have to imagine is a family somewhere in North Africa. And when they lit this, they used it as a prayer to Christ as the light. And when they were thinking of Christ as the light, they were living in a very different universe to ours, because light was the very first thing created. We think of the universe as darkness and empty space. You know the phrase from Pascal, the infinite spaces of the eternal darkness frightens me. But their universe was full of light. In the beginning, let there be light. And what they were doing was they were sharing in this light. Light was the first creation, and to have it was to have a gift of God. But Christ was also light. So this lamp was celebrating the creation. It was celebrating Christ as light. It was celebrating Christ as victor. And it was also a practical thing. You could cook, you could do your homework with a little lamp like this. It probably cost it may not even have made it wasn't even worth a denarius. And yet, to me, looking at this light, this little lamp, I'm reminded that Christianity is a community. I'm reminded how differently that community looked on Jesus. I'm reminded how differently they looked on the creation. And suddenly, this becomes a tangible way of seeing Christian faith, which is at once the same faith, but also an incredibly different faith.
So rather than a text and something that you just read, there's something that you can hold that connects you to the people who once also held that object and what it meant to them, and they were holding light. Yeah. How then is light, this symbolism of light, important in Christian history?
For some theologians, they were able to build their entire theology around the idea of light. Light came forth from God. It came forth, it enlightened minds, it enlightened the universe, it enlightened minds. It shone in such a way that people in its reflection could see God, just as in its light we see all around us. So light is one of the central metaphors of Christian thought, and this actually brings it before us.
And it becomes a central metaphor for God, doesn't it? Because
yes.
We're saturated in light, but we can't point to it. It makes all things visible. It's certainly a fascinating image.
And you cannot see.
And it's, yes, exactly. And it diffuses itself constantly, but is always infinitely close to us. It's a wonderful image. So what light can we shed on the Christian past in the 21st century now? We're so distant from objects like this, from imaginations that saw light everywhere. How can we know about the past now?
I think there's a danger in looking at the past in that we can think of Christianity as a theory which had disciples. Mm-hmm. Why I like this is it reminds us that Christianity is a community that produced texts. And so we may not get a sense of Christ our light when we flick a switch, but if we actually don't realize that light is something divine, and we don't realize how it changes us and changes the creation, then there's something we're missing. And I hope that this little light would remind us of that.
Right. I mean, we live in a world of theories, of grand scientific theories that we don't really have much sense of their history. And there is a tendency, isn't there, to turn Christianity into just another theory about the universe, or a theory about what human beings are like, or a theory about how we ought to live that's really quite abstract. So as a Christian historian, as a student of the past, how can that help to inform us about what Christian theology really is all about? Is it just another theory about the world?
The reason why Christianity must involve history, and therefore why the historian has something useful to say, is that Jesus is not a philosopher. We believe that Jesus is a human being acting in history. It's in discipleship to the person. The philosopher can write and you just encounter the thoughts. It's about encountering the community who encountered the individual, and it's about this individual historical encounter. And what this lamp reminds us is that this individual, Jesus, they saw as Christ our light. And it was that personal affirmation rather than a philosophical assertion that was at the centre.
So if I was wanting to study Christian history, study the past, there's more than 2,000 years of it now, where should I begin?
A useful book is Wayne Meek's The First Urban Christians. The reason it's useful is you will have read many of the sources, you will have heard many of the sources, but he will look at them in terms of what they tell you about a people rather than about abstract theories.
So there we have something about Christian history, about our physical connection to the past, about a religion and a community that's done so much to form the world in which we live in today, and of which Tom is a scholar, leading other students into that past, into a study of our inheritance. We hope that you found this short film informative and that it will encourage you to find out just a little bit more about Christian history.